Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gotland Game Talk for project managers and the game design department at Uppsala University. My name is Lina Source-Emerson. I will be your host here today, and I'm also a researcher and a teacher in game design with a focus on project management at Campus Gotland. The Gotland Game Talk is an open seminar series where everyone interested is welcome to join. These seminars are also part of the curriculum for students studying the bachelor program in game design and project management at Uppsala University. The format of these seminars is that I will have a conversation during 30 minutes with an invited guest about a pre-announced subject. This part of the seminar will be recorded and you can ask your questions in the chat. After 30 minutes, we will stop the recording and open up for a shared Q&A session where you can continue to ask your questions in the chat, but you can also raise your digital hand and unmute yourself to ask your question in person. Today, our guest is Phil Renshaw. Phil, he started his career in international banking, working in London, New York, and Sydney. He then moved into a corporate treasury and corporate finance world as a finance director in the IT sector. At this position, he tuned in to the important fact that it is actually the people in a company that make the difference, that makes the results and thereby the financial numbers. With this insight, Phil started a whole new chapter in his career. He went back to the university and got a PhD. And today he works as a researcher and also as a management and executive coach and a leadership development facilitator. When you talk to Phil, it's easy to understand that the passion he has is for teaching leaders the skill of coaching by focusing on everyday life situation. So today, Phil is joining us here to share his views on how to unite the leading and the coaching skills and how it is possible to effectively coach your team in 10 minutes per day. Great to have you with us, Phil.
Thanks very much, Lina. It's always great to talk.
Likewise, I like that. So Phil, I gave an introduction about yourself, but it would be wonderful to hear your personal story in your words about your professional background and your journey and why you do and what you do today.
Thank you. Well, I guess you already identified the really important piece. Maybe people didn't pick it out, but the really important piece is that I spent 20 years of my career as a finance professional. So I was a banker, I was a treasurer and a finance director. And I was driven by the belief that the numbers were the answer. If you focused on the numbers, on the projections for a business, and you always maintain that focus, then that was the future. That was the way forward to success. And we don't really have the time today, but there was a couple of big aha moments for me in life when I realized, you know what, that's not correct. Finance is critical. Don't get me wrong. You do need to understand it because it's the language of business. So whatever role you play in business, it's really important to understand that language. However, what generates success is the people. So it's all about the way you lead people, manage people, coach people. And that truly was a massive insight for me. You know, I was quite a stereotypical finance person, I think, who was just always focused on the numbers and possibly not aware of the impacts that focus may have on other people. You know, we're particularly aware in the last 2 or 3 years around well-being and how that affects people. I suspect that although it would have hurt me to know that I wasn't noticing it, I wasn't noticing it. That was just the outcome. So that was a huge change for me. And that's 13, 14 years ago now. And then, as you say, that change led to me moving gradually, not immediately, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I gradually found my place in this world of coaching and leadership development. And I was fortunate enough to meet Jenny Robinson, who I know you've interviewed very recently as my business partner. We met on our first day doing our PhDs in the field of leadership and management. And we hit it off immediately. And that's what led to us pursuing this passion.
So the title of today that I gave to the students joining this call is Uniting Leading and Coaching Skills to Develop Your Team and Its Members. I like to start up with, what is the first thought you get when you hear this title? What are the first thoughts?
Yeah. Well, you know me well, Lena, so I don't usually only have one thought. That's one of the problems that I bring. Yeah, many thoughts. When we talk about uniting leading and coaching, it's really important to us and to me, because very often people think and describe coaching as being a separate thing. Now we're coaching, now we're not. We would say that's possible, but not normal. So I'm a professional coach. That's part of what I do as well. So I go into organizations and coach people from all ranges, all seniorities, one-to-one. So when I'm doing that, I am absolutely coaching all the time. However, for most of us in our daily lives, particularly when we're working, that's not what's happening. We're drawing on the skills that together create this thing that are coaching, but we don't have to do it all in one go. So leading and coaching are really, interwoven with each other. So that's, really important to understand. And you will notice people who describe this differently, and we think incorrectly, making people think that coaching is just, I do coaching now, and now I do something else called leading. And we would say, no, they're too interwoven with each other for that to be true. The other thought I have, which is
Can I make a little bit break? Can you clarify what you mean with leading and what you mean with coaching, so everybody are on board and have the same picture of what leading and coaching is, and then go into the second thing?
Absolutely. Well, they are very closely connected. You see, we would say that this idea, which people normally do, of focusing on leading is ironically misleading. Okay, so talking about leading is misleading. What we should be talking about is leadership, because leadership is what happens normally, and leadership involves more than one person. As somebody very famous once said, no leader leads alone. You can lead yourself, but really when we're talking about this idea of a leader, we mean you have to be working with other people. So what's happening is leadership, you're working together. I would suggest the best way to define or separate leadership and coaching is to think of what is coaching and then say leadership can go beyond that and involve other things. So first of all, the question then is, what is coaching? So we would say coaching is working with somebody else to help them find their solutions. So it's all about helping them to determine what is the best step for them, the solutions that work for them. So it's not your ideas, it's not your solutions, it's their solutions. And the essence of coaching is that. So there are many different skills that get you there, but it's all about helping somebody else to work out the right answer for them. And why this is so important is we can easily fall into the trap of thinking that my way of doing things is the right way of doing things. Well, my way can be the right way for me, but it most definitely might not be the right way for you or for somebody else. So when we give people in business, when we give people objectives, one of the really important things is saying, here's the objective, how you get there is up to you. And that's the idea of recognizing this sense that we have different ways of doing things. So to come back, coaching is this idea of working with someone to help them find their own solutions. And that's part of leadership. Leadership, however, involves other things. For example, leadership can involve motivating others. Leadership, traditionally, if you ask people, leadership will be described as setting a vision, setting a mission, determining where we're going to go, whether as a team or a company, how we're going to get there. So there are these different things that are beyond coaching, but coaching itself is, we would say, is woven into the middle of leadership. And that's what makes it important to separate out the skills that together create this coaching, this way of helping other people find solutions, because then you'll understand how best to use them.
Okay, so let's go to the second thing you thought about when I mentioned the title, Uniting Leading and Coaching Skills.
Now you're asking me to think what I was about to say. Well, let me go with this that popped into my mind a moment ago. You and the people listening might have an idea of what leadership is. Jenny and I regularly work with people and we say, okay, put aside what you think leadership is in a textbook sense. Put aside what someone might have told you and think of someone who you really respect, someone you've worked with preferably, and you think is a great leader, then tell me what it is that they do. And when we ask that question, and we do this regularly with people, and we gather all of the information, the answers we get are almost exactly the equivalent of coaching skills. So people describe their favorite leaders as people who listen to them, as people who ask great questions to help them with their thinking. They describe people who empower them, who build trust and rapport with them, who are there to support them. They give you, time and attention. They allow you to make mistakes and learn from them. And all of these things, we would say, come into the skills of coaching. And although there are some different ones, as I already mentioned, when we ask people to describe, what are those things that make these people special to you, they nearly always describe these elements that we would say are part of coaching.
You mentioned question, and it is, as I understand, a key part in coaching. Could you tell us more about what about questions and the impact of importance of questions?
Absolutely, thank you. Great question. There are many different types of questions, and what I would say is this is quite an easy way to just think of two groups of questions. There are more, but just separate it this way will help you see how questioning works when you're in a coaching mode, this way of helping other people with their thinking. So the first way of asking questions I'd suggest is to gather information for yourself. So this happens all the time. Imagine if I needed to know what time this call ended and I didn't know, well, I'd ask you, you would tell me. If I didn't know what time the next train was, I'd ask someone, they would tell me. I'm asking a question to gather information for myself. But when you're in this role of using coaching skills and using questioning skills there, what you're doing is asking questions to help the other people with their thinking. So you need to be really creative. And we always emphasize this idea of creative questioning to help you think that it's not just questioning, because you could fall into the trap of asking questions to learn things for yourself, which has a purpose, that's useful. However, in the world of leadership and coaching, the powerful part is when you're asking somebody else questions that will help them with their thinking. So imagine a scenario when you're working on a project together and your colleague comes to you and says, this is the current situation. I don't know what to do. What do you think? Now, the instinctive answer to that for many people is to answer what you think, because they asked you. However, a leadership way would be to start by putting it back to help them and say something like, well, what thoughts have you had so far? What options have you thought of so far? If you had a magic wand, what could you do? So you're asking questions to help with their thinking, because you have this inherent belief that they probably know the answer. They just haven't managed to find it in their own head. And this is the epitome of coaching, because I'm helping somebody else with their thinking rather than telling them the answer. And hopefully there I gave you a sense of, I hope, but maybe people in their questions at the end can offer some, questions that are really creative. So for example, don't ask closed questions. We find ourselves all the time asking, without meaning to, closed questions. And a closed question is essentially something to which there are limited answers, like yes and no. So I ask you, are you happy? The answer is yes or no. If I asked you, how happy are you? I'd get a very different answer. And that can really, invite new learning for all of us. So creative questions are really important, almost the base part of a coaching skill.
Let's go to the other one that is about listening. The art of listening. You manage the art of questioning, having two ways of doing it, for info or for empowering somebody else thinking. But listening, what are your thoughts about that?
So again, really important part of this coaching idea of helping other people. Often, when we describe listening skills and the importance of listening, people's first reaction is to think, well, it's not a skill. I know how to listen. I'm not deaf. I can listen. What do you mean? Why is it a skill? And we can play various games to help people notice this, but often the simplest is just to ask you, who do you know who is a great listener? And most people have an answer to that, which tells you they do something different to other people. So what is it that makes them a great listener? Now, we would explicitly describe this skill as generative listening, not just listening, but generative listening. And this is because of the idea that when you get really good at listening, you help other people generate greater thinking. They generate greater insight just from your listening. Now, that sounds maybe like it should be straightforward, but it's not. Most of us will really have to tune in and practice to stop ourselves from interrupting, to stop ourselves from offering solutions or wanting to know more for our own purposes, interrupting to ask a question for ourselves. But the skill here is you're helping other people with their listening. You're helping them with their thinking. Sorry, you are doing the listening to help them with their thinking. So it takes real practice to stop yourself from interrupting and give your full attention. Particularly today, so many of us are used to working online that we allow other things to distract us. We have our emails on at the same time. We have our instant messaging on at the same time. IMs are popping in, or just our phones on. And these things interrupt our listening. And you can tell. I mean, I'm sure you and everyone, watching and listening thinks this, that, when someone's not listening to you, it's not very pleasant. You can tell they're doing something else, right? You can tell that they're texting, their eyes have gone to a different screen, something else is happening. And that suggests they're not listening, and it puts you off. It puts your thinking off. So this is why listening is so, so important. It's also important simplistically when you think about leadership. Would you want to work for people who don't listen to you? Right? I mean, if you had that experience, most of us, if we're older, we've had that experience of having to work with someone who just never seems to listen to us. They're just always telling us what to do. I've got ideas as well.
Let's go in to talk about this teaching or coaching people in 10 minutes a day. I know you spent a lot of time thinking about, how to coach and how to effectively coach from everyday life experiences.
Yep.
To the point that you and Jenny actually wrote a book about this,
yeah,
that I can see you have in the background there. And I like can you tell us, how come you started to think about this, that is it possible to coach someone in 10 minutes a day? Or, should we have like these monthly meetups, or, what are your thoughts about how and when to coach people?
So it's a really great and important question, because it helps me to explain, as you say, what drove us to write it and the distinctions that we see. The thing that was the initial driver is that most people, when they go on training courses to learn about coaching, they are taught that coaching is a process. They are taught that you have to follow a process, do things in a certain order, possibly move around a bit, but nonetheless, this idea of a process, and one in which you are coaching. You are definitely coaching. There's no doubt about the fact that you are coaching. And our view is that's wrong. It's very wrong. That's what professional coaches do. And it's usually professional coaches who teach others about coaching, which is where the mistake happens. In our view, this coaching is wrapped up in your everyday leadership. So when we wrote the book and used the title, Spending 10 Minutes a Day, the 10 minutes is actually not about you coaching someone for 10 minutes. It's about the idea that you spend 10 minutes thinking and reflecting on one of the skills of coaching. And we separate those out in the book, of course, to allow you to see them. And all the chapters are written so that you can read them in 10 minutes. You read the chapter about listening, for example, or about questioning, and that gives you some things that you can go and practice in your daily life. Whether you're a student or you're working on a project or you're in a company, whatever it is, doesn't matter. You do not need work experience to do this, but you practice experiments. And so that's the idea of the 10 minutes. It's the trigger for learning, for identifying things that you're going to experiment with that day. And then you basically build it into everything that you're doing all the time.
So what are the main points to be able to coach on the go? When you've gone through your book, you've done all of these chapters, you've done all of the 10 minutes, what are the main points to be able to coach on the go and that are so important that you actually will succeed?
I think the first one is the idea of awareness and self-awareness. So through practicing, well, let me answer it this way. I think there are two things. One is the awareness, and the other is these experiments. And we call these behavioral experiments, which is a term from psychology. And it's the idea that you test something out. You try a new behavior, see if things improve. And that might be as simple as trying to listen more and not interrupt and see what it does. And it's really important to see it as an experiment. It's not a requirement, it's an experiment, because you need to be looking and thinking about what happened. Did it work or did it not work? Right? So you might do it for a week. You look back and think, what changed? Because some things might get worse. Some things might not work. I don't know what they are, but you will find that out because it's all very personal. So you asked me what's the most important. I think that's one part, and then linked with that is self-awareness, because you need to be aware that you're doing these things, right? You need to have it in your mind that I'm practicing this particular new skill. I'm experimenting differently today. And these things are usually very small steps. It's also important. We're not suggesting that these are enormous overnight changes. That's also a big mistake in learning about leadership. People are sent on a course, they do a 2-week course, they come back and they expect their whole lives to be different. They're not going to be. We have to do it gradually. So awareness is really key to start noticing what's improving, what differences are happening. And you'll see that from those experiments.
So self-reflection, self-awareness, and then we're good to go. Or?
Well, yeah, because I mean, we think that there are 15 different dimensions of the thing we call coaching. And self-awareness is one of them. Reflection is another, because they are subtly different. I don't think we should go into them all right now, but they are subtly different, as is creative questioning that we mentioned, and generative listening that we mentioned. There are a whole series of different skills, but in terms of what's the most important, it's that idea of practicing those skills. And that relies upon this awareness of noticing what improves, because as it improves, it'll become part of your daily norms. You'll change into a good way of doing things. You will become that person that someone says, actually, you know what, Jan is a great listener. Or I'm stuck with this. Why don't we go and ask Joni, because she'll be able to ask questions that will really help me, even though she doesn't know what my project is. She really asks questions. She helps me think. And that's what I need right now. So, the whole thing is a journey, and it's also a continuous journey, by the way, because I am continuously learning from these sorts of things, realizing that it's, I've forgotten to do something. I've forgotten. It's so easily done that we make assumptions and then we forget, which is why this idea of awareness and thinking, okay, it's a new week or it's a new month. I'm just going to pick up the book. I'm going to flick to a chapter, read again for 10 minutes. It'll remind me, it'll give me some clues, some ideas of the different things I can practice, and then I'll put them into play with this focus. Sorry.
Yeah, and life happens, you get different kind of challenges. So, sometimes you can't practice something if you don't have it, but sometimes you get great opportunities to practice things.
Absolutely right. I mean, that gives me, reminds me of an example where, so one of our skills is around, of the dimensions of coaching is around creating actions. So helping other people to determine what they're going to do next in order to solve whatever it is they're trying to work on. And we were working, I think this was last year now, with a CEO, chief executive, and the feedback in terms of her own judgments suggested that she wasn't very good at creating actions. And one's first thought is to think, goodness me, she's the chief executive. That feels worrying. However, actually, when you stop back and reflect, which is what we did with her, she went, hang on a minute, I'm the chief executive. I'm not supposed to be setting actions. I'm at the top. I'm here to create the vision, to work together to get everyone to agree that we've got the right vision, that we're going in the right direction. And then my main role is to remove blockers, to remove things that get in other people's way, and to motivate them. So I'm not here to create actions. That's what other people do. And I'd be in, if I was doing that, my executive team would probably really be annoyed because I'm doing their work for them. Mm. And you go, so that makes sense. Makes complete sense.
I know that there is one skill that you have put a specific focus on, and it is the ability of learning to learn. Could you tell us more about it?
Of course. And this is part of what I was referring to earlier. You see, learning, it may be obvious because you've got lots of people listening to this who are learning, they're at university. But learning is actually an important part of life all the time. There's plenty of research that shows, for example, that learning is important to one's resilience. So if you are feeling down or feeling negative, the act of going to learn something new acts as a booster to your well-being. So we know that learning is powerful in that way. However, is this idea of we've probably all in our lives at some point, particularly as children, sat a test or sat an exam. We've done really well, but a week later, we can't remember any of it, right? We've been there. It's all gone. I used to describe having exams as like having a shower. The water's gone and it's just taken everything out of my brain. I've no idea where that knowledge went. I can't do calculus anymore. So that tells us that there's something important about learning to learn, to think about how you learn, because learning is only real if you're able to put it into practice in the future. You're able to draw on these ideas. So this fits into the behavioral experiment concept I was describing earlier. You need to practice a new thing. So, maybe I practice by turning off my instant messaging whilst I'm watching a lecture from Lena, and I see what happens. And I reflect, what did happen? What did I learn from that? Did I learn from that? That process will help reinforce and embed the learning. So it's really a simple step, but it is a vital step.
So there is a lot of different, theories, programs, courses, books out there regarding leadership, regarding coaching. What is the difference with what you and Jenny have created? What different impact do you have than other similar theories, books, strategies have?
Yeah. We would, of course, that question is probably best answered by people who are reading the book rather than me. But the principle that we're trying to draw at is you can separate out this thing called coaching, see that it's a subset of leadership, and notice that each of the different dimensions are actually straightforward. They're not complicated. They're straightforward. And that means anyone can start practicing them tomorrow, and you will get better at them. So great leadership, great coaching does not require business experience. It doesn't require it. It requires attention and practice, and anyone can do that. This idea of listening, it's a skill. You start doing it, put attention to it. The idea of asking great questions, practice it. You probably haven't practiced it before. These things can be separated out and practiced quite easily. It's just about attention and a small amount of time, hence back to the 10 minutes a day. Small amount of time will get you there. Sadly, there is no evidence that suggests that the more senior you get, the better you are at leadership. That might sound odd, but there's really no evidence in a research sense that suggests that. We could talk about what might be in the work, what might be enabling them to achieve that level of seniority, but it's not that. I'd offer you, given that it's in the news right now, I'd offer you Elon Musk. I suspect many people in this group, and even listening today, might have thought of Elon as a great leader. But look at what he's doing right now in Twitter. Everything you read about him, doesn't suggest he's a great leader. So that was a long answer, but coming back to what we think is the most important part is break this stuff down, start practicing. And by, goodness me, by the age of 25, you could have cracked all of these things. You could be so much better than other people around you, and that will make a massive difference to your success.
So what is a good leader and what is a good coach?
I think that would be, that's a really big question. I think a good coach, well, we use the phrase a leader who coaches. And we've actually, Jenny and I are attempting to put that in the world of academia as well. We've just written a paper which is about to be published, explicitly saying we need to stop using the many, many phrases that are already used in this space and use the phrase leader who coaches, to recognize that a great leader is someone who does coach, and a great coach is someone who leads. They're part and parcel of the same thing, and they're wrapped up together. Ultimately, I'd go back to this idea of the best coaches, and therefore the best leaders, are those who are able to empower others, to help others find their solutions rather than fixing and offering solutions themselves. It's about helping others to do it.
Thank you, Phil, for being here with us today. We will let this be the last words from you in this recorded session. But before we go to the Q&A session, I like to announce the last Gotland Game Talk for this semester, which will be in the 2nd of December, when we will meet Philip Svanström. That will share his personal knowledge, experience, and thoughts on how to start a board game company as a student, and what it means practically and personally to bring the company to the international market, and then after several years, take the decision to make and also to execute an exit of this company. So thanks, Phil, for being here with us and sharing these insights with us.